My name's Josie. Hello. I'm a singer-songwriter. I do covers. I'm really interested in sexual politics, intersectional feminism, especially, and mental health. So I am currently in the process of figuring out what I want to do on my social media and my YouTube channel, because I'm really interested in having conversations with people in my life, uploading them online, and just see what people pick up on, what they're interested in, to help educate people on certain things that perhaps there is stigma towards, and just begin opening up conversations. In the meantime, I wanted to start with this video talking about borderline personality disorder. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about it, then here I am to break some myths, educate you. But I do want to say I'm not a mental health professional. I am just someone who has experienced this disorder. I've been diagnosed with it, along with depression and anxiety. So I have got some questions that I pulled up. Let's go with something that I found on Vice. What are the main misconceptions surrounding BPD? First thing that comes in mind is that people think BPD is the acronym for bipolar disorder, but that's not the case. BPD is known as borderline personality disorder, and it's also known in the UK, where they're trying to go with a new term and phrase for it because they think that borderline personality is too stigmatizing. They are calling it emotionally unstable personality disorder. I mean, even that doesn't sound great, so a lot of people kind of have mixed feelings about it, but supposedly it's the better term used by the professionals moving forward. That's one of the main misconceptions. People don't realize what it actually is. They think it's bipolar. Well, if that's what you thought, then that's fine, but I'll just explain the main differences with bipolar disorder. It's a mood disorder. Borderline personality falls under personality disorders. Others commonly known are histrionic personality disorders, narcissistic personality disorder, sociopathy, people that experience more heavy sides of symptoms of personality disorders. There's also they're also within the same umbrella, but they're not the same. Okay, so just bear with me. So mood disorders, bipolar disorder. Depression falls under that as well. Anxiety, I believe, falls under that as well. Major depression falls under that as well. So bipolar is basically long-term shifts in mood. So you may have a period of mania, which can be hypermania, but it can also be manic depression. And then you can have periods of just depression. And the shifts can be within the space of several weeks to months at a time, of going through each phase with other indicative symptoms that make up the disorder as well. So with borderline personality disorder, it's not a mood disorder. It can stem from childhood neglect, sexual abuse, to do with relationships, friendships, and self-image. We do have moods where they fluctuate a lot, but those moods aren't necessarily to do with a chemical imbalance or hormone change. So the frontal cerebral cortex, I believe, is what really affects your moods. That's the front part of the brain. This part of the brain has a massive effect on those who suffer with bipolar disorder. I believe it still affects those with BPD, but whereas more influenced by external factors. The difference between that and bipolar is with BPD, borderline personality, these ups and downs can last maybe for a few hours at a time, or maybe a couple of days, and then switch. Another misconception is actually that we're violent people or over sexual, which is not the case for everyone. It depends on what your symptoms are. I know that there's 256 different combinations of the 9 main symptoms. So these are the 9 symptoms of borderline personality disorder. And we're really suffering with our disorder, we can have a really strong sense or fear of abandonment. And that might not even be what's actually happening or the actual state of reality at the time. They're clinging on and trying to find anyone or anything to put their trust and even their own self-worth into, to prove that that they're worthy, that there's value in themselves. So For example, in the past, I've been in relationships where I was like completely codependent emotionally on my ex-partners. I would expect them to regulate my moods or soothe me and comfort me because I hadn't learned the skills on how to self-soothe myself. This starts kind of like from childhood and it developed through my teens as well. So we have this innate fear of abandonment, even if it's not realistic, even though people aren't leaving in our lives, we can be like, well, you're gonna leave any second, like what am I gonna do? And it can get really complicated because we can go to quite drastic measures to prevent ourselves from being abandoned, and that can come off as like manipulative. But the important thing to remember is that when someone with BPD is going through that, they're not intentionally being manipulative. I think that's the difference between narcissistic personality disorder, which is one more commonly known these days. They don't have a sense of remorse or guilt. Whereas with BPD, we would do drastic things and go to drastic measures, but we will feel so shitty about it afterwards. Like we will, it can lead to like self-harming, suicidal ideation, taking your own life or attempting to take your own life. Kind of touched on like relationships already, but one of the biggest symptoms or marks of borderline personality disorder is unstable relationships. This can be romantic relationships, this can be relationships with your friends, relationships at work, and so forth. Luckily for me personally, I always really excelled at school and I was able to keep my emotions in check up until I was really in college and deal with my anxiety and depression and my impulsiveness and the feeling of like too much all the time. It's just overwhelming. Fortunately, now I'm in a place where I've given myself so much time in therapy and done a lot of reflection. I've sought ways to kind of develop myself on a personal level that my work ethics and my disorder doesn't really affect my life anymore anyway. I probably wouldn't even fit the criteria anymore if I was to be re-examined for this particular disorder. Personally, I had a lot of issues with romantic relationships and issues with my parents and my extended family. Another symptom is an unclear or shifting self-image. So to kind of touch upon my personal experience with this symptom, I was always told, even when I was in school, by like a best friend of mine, that I was two-faced because at one day I would present as this type of person and be hanging out with these types of people, chavs or the more sporty people into hip hop, grime and all of that. And then the next day I'd be, with my bestie, working to middle class, like white girls, let's say. So I was always really good at adapting to my environment, and that is indicative of the other self-soothing technique that we have or coping technique that we have. We become very good at adapting to any situation, which is what makes us like really great colleagues and team members, because we've had to learn, or we've grown up in situations in the past where we've just had to adapt, really kind of being able to process. So you learn how to adapt in new situations pretty quickly, and that can come off as a bit odd sometimes to people because they're like, well, one minute you come in like this and the next minute you're acting like this. Who is she, or like who is he? I would go through these phases. Oh, I want to wear tracksuits and hang out with like the stoners and just like have my black hood up and blacked out clothes all the time. And then other times I'd go into work preppy. I like to play around with my style a lot. I navigate that part of my disorder, I suppose, in that sense. The great thing about the therapy that I've had as well is that you really begin to learn how to tune in and figure out what you want. What are your targets in life? What makes you you? So what makes me Josie, and how am I Josie different to say Anne or whatever? The next one is impulsive self-destructive behavior, so like self-harming, suicide attempts, reckless behavior, impulsivity, let's say, being promiscuous. Like if you have a lot of sexual partners, then tick, you must have borderline personality disorder. And I don't think that's really fair. But saying that, some people do choose to deal with their struggles and their personal feelings in life through having maybe unprotected sex with several partners in a short period of time, and not taking care of themselves even if they are going through that. I wasn't really one of those people. When I fell in love with my exes at the time, I fell in love very deeply. I wasn't the kind of person that would go out to the club, with my girls and hook up with someone. Like that wasn't me. My friends were doing it, but that I would be like texting, whoever at like 3 a.m. being like, can I come over? Like, I don't want to be here. I don't like people. And it'd always be the same person a really, really long amount of time, sometimes even years. Okay, so we said impulsive self-destructive behaviors, self-harm. We said that. Extreme emotional mood swings. So we touched on that too. So going from like feeling really ecstatic, feeling validated, like the best in the world, to feeling like absolute crap. Am I here? Why do I exist? I'm a burden on everyone. I should just, go top myself. It's very difficult for those with borderline personality disorder to have a middle ground or grey area. So we have another term that is used, black and white thinking. People with BPD will either feel all in sometimes towards like a project, towards a person, or all out. There's no grey area. So we need to figure out a way to balance life and make realistic goals that are achievable in order to go through life kind of, at a slower pace without as much like destruction and chaos. Another symptom is explosive anger. I didn't really have this until I was really, really, really poorly in the UK. The reason why I didn't present this particular symptom until really difficult point of my illness was because I was used to having people around me explode in anger, and my way of coping with it was, there were bad ways of coping with it, toxic ways, but I pretty much learned like, okay, I can't respond and I can't react, because if I do react, then the situation's only gonna get worse. So I felt like my feelings don't matter. When this kept happening, I couldn't express myself, or I felt that I couldn't, and at that point I didn't even know how to express myself in a healthy way. I would explode and I would get angry. Remembering those things and how you hurt people, it's really difficult. If I could take it back and the things that I'd said and did, I wish I could, but it is what it is, and I was acting as a result of a lack of knowing how to self-soothe, not having like enough support with my mental health, not having enough support generally in the household that I was living in, because it was just my mum and my sister and I. It's a difficult situation, we're all in. I need to, just put my feelings aside and just try and make this work. And that only really made things worse, because eventually I was like, what about me? What about what I want? What about my goals? What about my dreams? At the end of the day, it all just became about paying your bills, making enough money in the month, keep a roof over our heads, and that was like the most important thing. And it wasn't anyone's fault. It was just a lot of different things that accumulated, and it was like a domino effect. So yeah, those are the 9 symptoms. I think they're the 9 ones. Okay, perfect. Let's go back to some more kind of general questions. What's the best way you can support someone with BPD? Okay, it's hard to give advice on this, because I want to say go and do your research and find out what it's really about, but there's a lot out there that is not even close to being accurate, especially online. There's a lot of stigma against it, and it's really unfair, because we're actually good people just trying to get by. We just haven't been taught how to feel certain things and deal with certain things. And also scientifically, our brains are wired differently to like neurotypical people. What I would recommend instead, if you know someone with borderline personality disorder that has some resources, that has some links, some websites, a book or something like that they could give you to read, then that would be the best way to get your information on it, just because there's a lot of misleading information online. And then that it's kind of trusted. It's most likely been given to them or handed down to them from a professional anyway. So, it will give you a better idea of like what's going on. Also, don't be judgmental. We are, as people, extremely sensitive. The psychologist that actually developed the most effective therapy for people with BPD was called Marsha Linehan, and she developed dialectical behavioral therapy, which is meant to be the most proven, or it's got the best results basically for managing symptoms and effects of borderline personality disorder. Go and look her up. She's great. She also had BPD, and then she ended up making like this therapy that is now recognized across the world, and it's been proven to be really successful. So popular culture doesn't treat borderline personality disorder. It's not accurate. Like Fatal Attraction is horrendous. Hollywood just paints us out to be terrible, awful people. And I'm not, some people really do suffer, and those that are dealing with like the more difficult symptoms, They can be unstable, but they're very unlikely to be dangerous to anyone else. The biggest risk that you have really is the risk towards yourself and keeping yourself safe. Have you been discriminated against? Not that I've noticed, but I don't know what people say behind my back. I've seen a lot of things online where people have been discriminative towards those suffering with borderline personality disorder. It was difficult for my loved ones to really understand in the beginning what it was. It was hard to make people understand that even though I have this and my emotions are enhanced all the time, it doesn't mean that what I'm feeling isn't true or is not valid or it shouldn't be validated or recognized. So, always just listen to those who have this disorder. Give them your ear, let them just explain how they're feeling and why. A lot of the time you'll find that they have a lot of self-awareness, and it's one of those things with the psychiatrists generally who are studying this disorder, is that it's so incredible how intellectual and self-aware these people are, and yet they still fall into bad, toxic behavior, like making decisions that are not the best and so forth. So yeah, it's interesting. What is the one thing about BPD that you wish everyone knew? It can get better over time. There's research and studies that have proved that as the individuals move past their teens, they end up not experiencing, let's say, 5 or even 4, even 3 symptoms out of the 9. So there is hope. And this is coming from someone who has been at the pits of hell, endless, like more times than I can count in my hands. It does get better. And I've noticed for myself as well, in the last year, I would say this is the most myself that I've felt. And I never thought that I would be able to get to that point where it doesn't feel like I just want to end things, to put it bluntly, because we're so sensitive. We are known as chameleons, but also burn victims. So they say that people with BPD walk around with open wounds. Even touching one of these wounds, it's like we feel it even more than anyone else. And that kind of goes with all emotions. So for me, I try to check that, because my moods can be very dependent on the people that I'm around, and they can be influenced by other people. So it's really important for me to recognize that and check in on myself and be like, okay, this is really stressful. This is a stressful situation, or this thing that this person's telling me is kind of stressful. What can I do for myself now so I don't carry on that stress and allow it to affect me? But again, this is all because I've had therapy and I have enough self-awareness and knowledge on when to recognize when things are getting a little bit and they're kind of bubbling, like, okay, instead of letting them bubble, and then hit 10 every 2 days, let's just figure out a way to bring it back to like a 3 or a 2, instead of being like a 5 stress level out of 10, and it just going up from there. Another question. So medication. People with personality disorders can be medicated, but specifically for borderline personality disorder, there is no set of drug that is prescribed. Usually, if people are medicated, it's most likely because they have comorbid disorders. So that means that they have borderline personality, but they also may suffer with depression and like anxiety and panic attacks. Or for example, people with borderline personality disorder can even, in more severe cases, experience psychosis. They may be treated for that. It really depends. It depends on what symptoms you experience and so forth. I never had any severe symptoms of psychosis. I never hallucinated. I never had visual or auditory hallucinations. The only thing that I experience that sometimes falls under the same umbrella is dissociation. So dissociation is that feeling of like numbness when you just feel like you're not in this world and you're not real, or the world and the people around you are not real. I experienced this heavily in college because I had a really difficult time making friends there. I did experience some bullying and there were rumors and things spread about me. So that led to like my anxiety becoming a lot worse. And because I was so anxious all the time, I would dissociate as a way of dealing with that anxiety, because when you dissociate, you're numb. However, on the other side, when you dissociate, it can be very stressful because, again, you feel like you're in a bubble and it's like nothing feels real. So it's very strange. Thank God I never really went through that again afterwards. So back to medication. If you experience psychosis, you can get medication for that. If you suffer with borderline personality disorder and you have low mood swings that are really low when they're low, you may be given an antidepressant to deal with the depressive kind of periods. You are prescribed with something for the psychosis. That same medication can also be used for other people with borderline personality disorder that may just need some help in balancing the erraticness and impulsiveness. I was in hospital, they looked at my medication and they said to me, okay, we're going to give you this antidepressant and we're going to give you this mood stabilizer. The mood stabilizer helped me so much. So much, and I am now in the process of, well, I take a third of the amount that I used to take, and to me that's like a great success because it means that I'm kind of finally stable enough to not need to rely on my medication, and my symptoms are only improving. Really glad that I'm coming off it because I don't experience psychosis, and my impulsiveness and self-destructive behavior is like at 0 compared to it being like a 7 before. I don't really see the need in taking it anymore, which is why I'm reducing it. Antidepressants and antipsychotics are what are used to, and maybe even anti-anxiety medication might be used for people that have borderline personality disorder. How do I help a loved one on a massive high who thinks they're fine? It's difficult to help pull someone out of that. When you're in that phase and having that high, it doesn't feel bad. This is weird, like maybe I should check myself because it feels so good. Showing your support, be patient. If you think that they're going to do something detrimental to themselves during this time, and maybe speak to someone that you can trust or one of their close loved ones that may be able to, help with the situation from there. But at the end of the day, you're not responsible really for anyone else. You can only be responsible for yourself. It's hard. That's a hard question. When is it appropriate to call the police if someone is unwell, stating that they want to kill someone else? I mean, look, if someone's saying that they want to kill someone else, you got to call the police. No real question about it. But yeah, as I said, this is kind of a weird question to come across because if someone is really unwell with borderline personality disorder, they may have those thoughts. But A, doesn't mean that they're going to do it. They rarely ever do. And what they do usually is it will be kind of drawn back towards themselves. So they'll harm themselves. Always call the police. Even if someone's threatening for their own life, if someone's telling you that they've hurt themselves, never, ever doubt what a vulnerable person is saying. If they're telling you that they're feeling suicidal, if they tell you that they've made an attempt to kill themselves, call the police. Because you never know if that one time ends up being the last and only time that person makes that choice. And I don't mean that in a good way, like in a negative way. I mean, those are questions that I brought up now. Yeah, I want to start this as kind of like a little series. And then if you guys have any more questions, drop me a message. I will be talking more specifically about certain parts of this disorder in other videos. Check your facts. Use reliable sources and links if you're going to do research online about this. Speak to people that are actually dealing with this disorder before you go and make assumptions about how they feel or how they deal with it. I will be back soon, and who knows, we might even have a podcast coming up.